Night Bulletin presents Strange Men in Bowler Hats, written and read by TF Ahmad.
1 year ago, I took my holiday in Brislington. I had heard from several friends that this quaint little town close to my father's birthplace of Bath was a center for paranormal activity and the supernatural. I, of course, waved off such notions, and you can testify to my skepticism of such matters. Despite my insistence of my safety, my friends begged me to travel elsewhere or take a companion with me. I have always been a solitary traveler. Bachelors such as myself often are, so I declined any suggestions on altering my plans. I took the evening train out of Victoria Station and arrived in Brislington shortly before midnight. I took a cab to my hotel and unpacked my things. Due to my thin budget, my time was limited in Brislington, and I wished to make the most of it. I placed my clothing from my trunk into the armoire and set out my suit for the day. The room was of an adequate size. It reminded me of a boarding house of the sort English writers down on their luck might find themselves in. It was long and narrow, with a writing table at one end. The other end was occupied by the bed, a small, rickety appendage bolted to the wall. A small pitcher and wash basin atop a wooden table took over the last space available in the room. I produced a small notebook, pen, and travel guide from my bag, placing it on the writing table. I spent a few minutes scribbling in my notebook before heading off to bed. My fatigue was great, as a deep chill entering my train compartment had kept me awake the entire ride. I awoke the next morning feeling refreshed, and I readied myself for a day of ambulation and quiet sightseeing. I ate a hearty English breakfast at the hotel bar and set out while the dew was still wet on the grass. I decided first to make my way to the home of St. Anne's, which was built atop an old chapel which no longer stands. I then made my way to St. Luke's Church and toured its stunning architecture. I took my lunch, a small sandwich from a nearby shop, to St. Andrew's Park. This town, which had quite an affinity for long-dead saints, was charming my heart. The final destination for the evening was the Brislington House. I was told by a kind guard that this lunatic asylum was built with the intention of treating its patients morally. I was not allowed within the walls, but I ambulated around the grounds with a curiosity I had rarely felt at new places. The guard had spoken of luxurious rooms and straw beds and numerous courtyards filled with flowers of the Orient. He had also spoken of hot and cold baths and patient segregation based on social rank. These methods had been commended by the top scientists in Britain and had even gained the praise of the crown. These amiable conditions and charm of the old town did not conjure the fear my friends had warned me about. Back in my room, I changed my shirt and headed to the hotel bar, ordering a brandy straight away. Finishing that drink, I ordered a second brandy before inquiring about the special for the evening. "Beef stew with boiled vegetables in broth," the barkeep said in a harsh and hot voice. It sounded as if he had spent his childhood in a house that was perpetually on fire. "Yes," I said. "I will have that, please." He eyed my empty glass. "I think I will have a lager," I said, anticipating his question. He nodded and left me with my thoughts. I grabbed the handle of the mug and sipped my drink slowly. The accumulation of alcohol in my veins started relaxing my body, and I allowed myself to glance at the other patrons seated around me. I saw men of all shapes and sizes and colors. Brislington didn't initially strike me as a cosmopolitan town, but this inn challenged that notion. I ordered a second lager with my dinner and spent the next half hour hunched over my hot meal. I paid, thanking the barkeep for his service. He simply nodded and turned to resume drying some drinking glass with a yellowing rag. I turned to my left, and here, my friend, is where the story takes a turn towards the bizarre. A man sat on the adjacent bar stool. I hadn't noticed him earlier, nor felt his presence beside me during my meal. He wore a dark suit, blacker than the evening sky. His black bowler hat gave me an odd sense of familiarity, as if I'd seen him before. Upon examination of his features, however, I discovered that this man's visage was entirely new to me. His nose was sharp, pointing down towards his drink like an accusatory finger. His fingers were thin and knobby. They appeared weak wrapped around his small drinking glass. The cuffs and collar of his shirt were yellow with sweat and dirt, giving him the distinct appearance of a homeless vagrant. A thin mustache rested upon his upper lip, and his eyes displayed a perpetual sadness. The man, at first unaware of my analysis of him, rose his glass to his lips. His hand shook with an apparent trauma. I waited until his glass was drained. I signaled towards the man tending bar. "A brandy for myself, sir," I called with my hand extended as if for a taxi. "And one for this fine gentleman here," I continued, gesturing to the empty glass of the man next to me. He at last looked up, his eyebrows raised in a sort of resigned surprise, as if this exact situation had happened to him before. The bartender poured out 2 glasses of brandy, mine over ice, and placed them before us. I paid for the drinks and faced my new companion. "I rarely think it right for solitary men to drink alone," I said, raising my glass. He looked at me impassively before taking a sip, his eyes still containing an indescribable sadness. "If my previous observations are correct, sir," he said in an accent I did not recognize, "you yourself were drinking without company during your entire meal." I raised my eyebrow and replied, "Just because I do it does not mean I particularly enjoy it." I smiled. He returned the smile, but his eyes remained unchanged. A strong curiosity lit my soul, and I had to know what was troubling this man. However, in an effort not to offend his sensibilities, I contained myself against hastiness and offered easy conversation instead. "Do you travel often to Brislington?" I asked. "Quite often." His truncated answer was followed by a large gulp of brandy. "And where is it you travel from?" "I often do not have a home," the man answered in a heavy voice. "I stay somewhere a while, and then head off somewhere else." "Yet you often find yourself here, in Brislington?" "Yes." We both drank in silence for a few minutes, me trying to figure out the best way to pry information from this man, and he, I presume, trying to figure out the best way to avoid giving me any information. "You seem very curious about my situation," the man offered suspiciously. I raised my eyebrows once more, this time feigning surprise at his accusation. "That is quite perceptive of you," I returned, unsure of what to say next. "If you are so curious, then why not just ask?" he offered. I considered this, tipping my glass and downing the rest of my brandy. I relished in the chilly burn it left in my throat like the tearing of a strong adhesive bandage. "Something seems to be upsetting you," I began, choosing my words with the care of a surgeon. "I gather you are not inflicted with a disease, for though you are thin, your face shows a healthy disposition. I also see that you are not in the throes of addiction, because you appear calm and do not fidget constantly as you drink. I cannot speak to any other aspects of your life, for I do not know enough. One interesting aspect of your person, however, is your gaze. Those eyes of yours seem to be filled with a perpetual sadness. My question, that you so wonderfully anticipated, is what could possibly have caused this sadness in you?" The man said nothing, and his expression did not change throughout my statement. I was about to inquire about his silence when he spoke. "You are quite correct in your observations." His accent was still imperceptible, though I was sure he was a man of the United Kingdom. "I am afflicted with no physical disease," he continued, "but you might say my condition is one of a mental sort, a disease of the mind." "A disease of the mind?" I asked. Surely this man was not mad. He certainly did not appear so. "Yes," he answered, "an addiction of sorts." The man finished his drink and placed the glass upside down upon the bar. He grabbed a knapsack and turned to leave. I grabbed his shoulder impulsively. This violent gesture caught the eye of some of the tavern patrons, but they quickly turned away once they realized the scuffle was not to take place. He turned to me, his eyes swimming with a fire that I have not seen in eyes before or since. His gaze could have set the hearth ablaze, and for an instant I thought him a demon. "Sir," the man said, his voice firm yet still cordial, "it is best if we were to part ways for the evening. I am grateful for the drink, believe you me, but I am quite certain that nothing good will come from talking to me further." I stood frozen before the strange and hostile man, my hand still clutching his arm. I removed it, watching him turn towards the stairs. What was this strange man's story? What had he meant by nothing good coming from speaking to him? I shuddered and retired to my room, determined to forget the entire affair. I was lying in my bed when I heard a soft knock on the door. I snapped out of my reflection of the day, frozen. I heard the knock again, only this time it was louder. Afraid of causing a scene, I violently tossed aside my sheets and answered the door without peering out of the peephole to see who it was. The man from the bar stood before me, his dust-spotted suit reflecting in the dim moonlight that entered through the hall window. His bowler hat was affixed to his head, brim tilted low. His head was down, and though I could not see his face, I knew it was him instantly. He spoke, his voice grave and powerful. "I would like to apologize for my earlier behavior. It was quite disagreeable of me to lash out at you like that." "It is quite all right," I answered, unsure of myself. "Please," I gestured, "enter." He said nothing and stalked into my room. His head remained low and his footsteps light as he made his way to the foot of my bed. I stood by a jug of water I had asked the barkeep to deliver to my room before retiring and filled a glass with water. I sipped it with nervous hands. "You must find me strange," my new companion said. "Not at all," I replied. I do not recall if I had answered that too quickly or not. The man laughed humorlessly. "If you knew my story, sir, I most definitely think you'd find me strange." "Then you may tell me your story with confidence. I can assure you I am not much of a talker myself." Another humorless laugh. "It is not fresh ears that I fear, nor is it ridicule I fear. It is the danger in what I'm about to tell you that I find holding me back." The man's earlier words echoed in my mind. "I am quite certain nothing good will come from talking to me." I shivered and refilled my glass of water. "So tell," I said. "Tell me what ails you." The man sighed and began a speech that rooted me to my spot and made me fear any movement. "My name is not important," he began. "My ordeal started several years ago in this very town. I, like you, was a traveling bachelor on holiday. I chose this town likely for the same reasons you did. During my stay, I found a bulletin advertising a show in a remote part of town. I inquired to the innkeeper about the bulletin, but he had no knowledge of such a show, nor could he provide me with details about the nature of the programming. I returned later to where the advertisement was posted and found it gone. My memory in that age was sharp, however, and I recalled the information upon it clearly. This was little help due to my lack of knowledge of the town and venue. I do not know why I felt so compelled to go to this show, but it would not leave my mind all evening. Whilst tossing and turning in my bed that night, I heard a sound at my door and bolted upright. There was a sealed envelope on the floor, its delivery man receding with quick steps down the hall. I opened the envelope in a frenzy and found the flyer I had seen earlier. Beneath it was a crude map showing me how to get to the venue, along with a slip of paper bearing a single, cryptic message. "Commit to memory, then burn." Needless to say, my fear got the better of me, and I complied with the instructions on the paper. That night, I donned my suit, boarded a midnight train, and went to the show. There was a silence then, one that seemed to blanket the room like a heavy snowfall. I swore the creaking of the pipes and the scurrying of the rats in the wall ceased at that very moment. "What kind of show was it?" I asked. It was a show so terrifying, so utterly inhumane in its content, that I fear speaking of it would put me in a fit of terror. The show, if it can be so called, changed my life forever, and not in a positive way. It is a presentation so vile, so godless that I swear the devil himself attends. The man looked up at this moment, his visage pale but his eyes burning. "And I must go back." My face drained of color at these ominous words, and a sudden thirst assaulted my throat. I brought my glass to my lips and downed the lukewarm water in a single gulp, paying no mind to the drops that fell upon my nightgown. "Why?" I croaked. The water had not satisfied my throat as much as I would have liked it to. The nameless man's eyes blazed still with their fury, and my frozen position prevented me from fleeing, despite my mind's protestations to the contrary. "I cannot help it," the man said, frowning. "It is a compulsion that I cannot shake. It feels like a duty to me." For a reason I cannot state, a powerful, overwhelming feeling of desire filled me. I felt that I must follow this man into the jaws of the beast, into the show endorsed by Lucifer. It must have been as this man felt, all those years ago, when that ominous envelope had been left at his door. He must have seen this new expression color my face, for he stood up in haste and adjusted his suit roughly. "I believe I will be heading off to bed now," the man said. The lie was thoroughly unconvincing, and he knew it. He turned towards the door, but my quick reflex caught his arm in a strong grip. "Please," I begged, "take me with you." The man shook his head solemnly. "It is not wise to follow a man to hell. If it was hell as you truly say, then it must be a hell strong men can survive. Survival is not an issue. My life is a constant fog, an existence even strong men cannot often bear. But I'm stronger than strong men," I insisted loudly. I faintly heard beds in adjoining rooms squealing from disturbed slumbers. The man sighed once more, his posture slouching with the might of mountains. "Follow closely," he said at last, his voice heavy with resignation. I donned my suit in record time and followed my companion out into the chilly and foggy night. The cathedral's clock struck midnight as we made our way to the train station. The final train to the outskirts of town departed mere moments after we boarded, and I reveled in the blessing of our speed. The conductor received us with fatigue and hardly looked at us as we handed our tickets into his weary hands. Our car was empty, and the dreary atmosphere caused me to consider the action I was taking. I had followed a stranger onto a midnight train to the edges of a strange town in order to view a show the stranger claimed was attended by the devil. I, however, had to know what it was all about. I hope you understand this, my friend, that despite all of the misgivings my rational mind screamed, I was compelled by a deeper, darker force to continue on. A man on holiday, after all, should see all the sights he can, shouldn't he? The ride felt long, and we only stopped once before disembarking. My companion hardly spoke during our journey, and he was equally silent when we inhaled the crisp night air on the platform. The train idled in the station for a moment longer before sliding along deeper into the countryside. The station was utterly abandoned, and only a handful of lamps lit the space around us. My companion pointed towards a black mass in the distance. "That is an old storeroom for carriages," he said. "You used to be able to rent a carriage, horse, and driver to take you anywhere in the surrounding country. This was back when the station was the final stop of the line. The building hasn't been used for its intended purpose in over half a century. It is our destination tonight." He started towards the black mass, and I followed behind. Neither of us had any additional light to guide us, and we found ourselves in total darkness. The moonlight was sparse and obscured by rolling clouds. My hand found my companion's shoulder. He did not flinch at my touch, but I almost recoiled when I felt how bony his body was beneath his coat. I shuddered, and not from the cold. The black mass got larger the closer we got, and my heart thumped faster in my chest when I saw the size of the edifice. It seemed to tower before us, its architectural reality only becoming apparent when we were a mere 10 feet away. The building was made of brick, though it appeared blacker than night. The only windows I could see were high up on the building, resembling the clerestory windows of a great church. My companion guided me to a door I did not notice until I was being led through it, into this tower of doom. The interior of the space was hardly brighter than the outdoors. Though my person remained in shadow, I could perceive light from a single electrical bulb in the distance. My companion and I approached the light, our steps soundless on the cold, hard floor. My grip on the shoulder in front of me loosened. Despite our diminishing distance to the source, the illumination didn't appear any more intense. We stopped, and I observed a line across my vision. I blinked several times to realize it was a platform of some sort, almost like the stage of a theater. Upon this stage stood a man, dressed in a similar fashion as my new friend. He was in a dark suit and a bowler hat, his features obscured by the shadows. He was immobile and appeared to lack the gift of muscular movement. There was something dangling beside him, and I had to squint to accurately discern what it was. It was a noose, dangling from an unseen height above the stage. I felt a shiver pulse through my body. The feeling instilled a sense of reality in me, and I at once knew that I was in circumstances men of righteous dispositions did not find themselves in. Despite my misgivings, I kept my face still and body erect, standing beside my companion in the same rigid post as he. He nodded to me slightly, almost imperceptibly, and I nodded back. As if on cue, the man stared down at my companion and I. He spoke in a dreadfully sinister voice, and I still hear that voice today in my mind when I try to catch the sweet repose of sleep. The voice was gravelly, harsh, and sounded like boiling earth. "You are the first to arrive." My companion was not fazed by this devilish voice, and I recalled that this man had dealt with such circumstances before. I then heard a disturbing noise behind me, the creaking of a door on its rusty hinges. I kept my resolve as I heard the rustling of suits and bodies behind me. The footsteps of these new occupants were as soundless as the Moors as they took their positions around my companion and I. None of them spoke. The man on the stage remained silent. His head bobbed up and down as if he were using the tip of his nose to count the occupants of the room. When he stopped, he appeared satisfied, as evidenced by the relaxation of his posture. "There is someone new here tonight," the gravelly voice intoned. "While everyone knows our custom regarding newcomers, the newcomers themselves are often unaware of the customs. It is our custom, of course, to let the newcomer observe the ritual first, then decide if he wants to partake. He will become aware, however, of the consequences should he refuse." I observed a man slowly walk towards the platform. He stopped beside the man of shadows, both of their faces obscured by the dim light above them. The newcomer to the stage removed his bowler hat and handed it to the apparent facilitator of the evening's events. He was then helped into the noose by the free hand of the facilitator. The bile rose in my throat and my body screamed in protest. My companion stole a quick glance my way, but he needn't worry. I was compelled to stay. My dear friend, had I known what the result of my participation in this would be, I would have turned on my heels and ran into the night. But fear and my dreadful English manners kept me rooted to my spot like a sad tree. I watched in horror as the noose tightened around the man's neck and an unseen apparatus lifted him up into the air. He was left dangling with his feet pointed towards the ground, the toes of his shoes barely scraping the platform underneath him. Though what I am describing sounds like a traditional hanging left for criminals of the most evil kind, I assure you it was not such. The man did not writhe, he did not kick, he did not even appear to choke at all. No sounds escaped from his throat, and his hands lay limply at his side, accepting their fate soundly. I stole a glance at my companion and saw that a look of ecstasy and reverie painted his partially obscured face. His eyes were glassy, euphoric, and he appeared to be envious of the man's position. I recognized that face, and I understood what sort of event I had arrived at. My nameless companion shared the look of those countless nameless faces that crowded the public houses of London. These nameless faces eagerly awaited their turn to order their beverages of sorrow from the barkeep, or watched in jealousy as men in more modest positions bought a drink which these nameless faces could not themselves afford. It was the face of an addict, the face of a man caught between two lightings of the opium pipe, between two doses of morphine prescribed for an ailment long gone. It was a face I feared. The man dangling from the rope did not appear to lose any life. His body jerked imperceptibly and his hands trembled, comparable to a man with only mild nerves. The man was alive. I knew this as sure as I knew there was a God in heaven and a devil in hell. After an agonizing 2 minutes, the man was lowered. The noose was loosened, and his bowler hat was returned to his head. As he exited the stage, it occurred to me that my turn had come. I shook with a visible nervousness, one that I could scarcely contain. Have you ever felt a fear so total, so all-consuming that you thought you would sick up your dinner? My fear was placated to a small degree by a gentle hand on my shoulder. It was my companion. He nodded, and I saw hope in his face. For a moment, my fear that I would die that night left me. Hadn't the man before me survived? I felt foolish, and a confidence often felt by ignorant amateurs draped me from head to toe. My confidence remained as I walked upon the stage. For a moment, neither me nor the man next to me moved. I had expected an introduction of some kind, but the silence remained. I reached for the noose. What else was there left to do? I placed it over my head, feeling the loop shrink to fit my neck snug. I was pulled to a perfectly vertical standing position. I coughed. The rough rope glided and scraped my neck, but no pain accompanied the sensation. I stole a quick glance at the man next to me and saw what I thought was a glimmer of white in the darkness of his face. He was smiling in grave anticipation. I was then jerked upwards. My feet left the hard, dirty wood of the platform, my toes pointing towards the floor. My legs instinctively swung like a child on a porch swing. The man before me must have been experienced, for while he was almost immobile, my arms swung desperately, my hands occasionally reaching for my throat, tugging the rope furiously. It was then the pain hit me, and choking sounds escaped my throat. What had I done wrong? I asked myself. Had I not concentrated enough? Had I not assumed the correct position or called out to the correct God in prayer? My eyes searched the crowd for my companion. I found 7 or so identical faces staring back at me, their eyes glazed, their faces contorted in envy. The primordial instinct to preserve my life came forth, for I was sure in that moment that I was going to die. I was sure God was about to appear before me and judge me with the harsh and stern force left for mortal sinners. Only, it was not God that appeared before me. Out in the blackness behind the small crowd of men appeared a black shape, one darker than night, darker than the deepest silence. The shape was tall, and from my vantage point appeared like a long shadow cast at midday. The shape had arms longer than most men's full heights and legs twice that length. The torso was gaunt and sickly with no appearance of bones or a skeletal structure of any kind. I was sure the elongated head had a face, and that face had eyes, and those eyes were studying me intently. The thing did not move. More started to appear in the darkness, somehow making themselves apparent despite the impossibility of black-on-black visibility. They were all watching my suffering, all studying me like a botanist studies a specimen. An eternity seemed to pass, and for all that time I never felt faint. My vision did not blur, consciousness did not fade. I was entirely awake and aware of my pain. I was at last lowered, the noose taken from my throat, and leave given for me to step off the stage. I had not looked at the man next to me, but I was sure that smile of anticipation had changed to one of satisfaction. My companion did not eye me as he made his way to the stage. During his session, I saw those tall, black demons bursting in and out of existence, observing me, observing the stage, and studying the events of the evening. It was a short time later that all of the sessions ceased. My companion turned towards the door. I followed silently, unable to utter a word. My hand constantly went to my throat, for swallowing was still followed by pain, yet I did not feel the distinctive mark of a noose regularly found on the convicted and the doomed. We stepped outside, and an immense feeling of unreality hit me. It was morning. The first glimmers of sunrise had begun creeping over the horizon. The sky was still dim, yet after being in almost total blackness, the feeble light was blinding. The men departed in various directions, heads lowered, hats blocking any recognizable features. In spite of not being able to identify these men in a police lineup, I am quite certain I have been in Congress with them at least thrice more since that fateful night. My companion and I boarded the morning train back to Brislington, sitting in silence for the first half of the journey. It was with a tired heart and heavy head that I asked, "Why did you bring me to that awful place?" My companion looked up at me, his sad eyes heavy with tears. "Because you asked me to," he replied. I felt anger rise up within me. Why had he not insisted I stay behind? Why had he even knocked on my door and beckoned me to follow him into the night? Could he have let me be? I wanted to raise my voice, to shout obscenities at him, but I was so very fatigued. Had this man had a choice in the matter? Had he been compelled by some outside force to draw me into that dark room with him? Had I unknowingly become some sort of sacrifice to some unknown demon? I could not be sure. Despite that, I still had my questions. I looked up, noticing something in the train with us. On the opposite end of the car sat a dark figure I recognized. Its black body remained still, 2 dull red orbs in the space reserved for eyes in a human face. Despite the encroaching sunlight of the day, the figure remained blacker than any night I had ever seen, a void in the fabric of reality. My companion must have observed my gaze, and he answered all of my questions in 6 simple words. "So you can see them too." It was not a question. We rode the rest of the way in silence, and I do not recall if we spoke any other words to each other before parting ways. I have seen that man 3 times since, all in Brislington. We have not spoken since that night, nor have we acknowledged the other's presence. We did not even look at each other's faces, for our bowler hats have always concealed our visage. No, my friend, I do not know what they are, nor do I know where they come from. I cannot comment on their actions or their motives. I will not even bother to hypothesize their power. They do not speak, they do not breathe, and they do not move when observed. They only pop in and out of existence in the soupy night, studying. I have no reason to doubt my sanity, nor do you, my friend. I do acknowledge that one of these demons has been in this room with us during my entire monologue, standing behind your chair. Don't turn. You will not see anything. You think I try to frighten you, but I mean to do no such thing. Your eyes show fright, but look at mine. This is acceptance that you see. It is an acceptance that though God may be real, so is his antithesis. I have mentioned before that in the year since I've been plagued with these visions, I have been to Brislington 3 times. I have been to that devilish show as many times, hanging from the noose limply, reveling in the strange ritual I once feared. You shudder, but you must not. No danger shall befall you as long as you heed my warning. Stay away from Brislington at all costs. Do not allow yourself the temptation of new experience. Do not think it is easy to crawl out of the jaws of the beast once you have dived in. The hour grows late, my friend, and I must retire for the night. I am to catch the early morning train to Brislington, back to that perverse theater. It is hell, but it is a hell strong men can truly survive. That was Strange Men in Bowler Hats. Please rate, review, subscribe, and tell a friend about this podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on
The Night Bulletin.